What gives reptiles such a bad reputation? Is it because they're really slimy, slithery, and sneaky, and they make you want to go ew whenever you think about them? Well, maybe that's what you've heard, but first you should get to know some of the lizards and snakes we live with here in the Mojave Desert. And when reptile expert Alex Heindel shows you some of his best specimens the way you would never get to see them in the wild, we think you'll change from saying, ew, a reptile, to wow, what an amazing creature.
Why don't we start with one of my favorites and one of the most unusual reptiles that we have in the Mojave. This is a Gila monster. It is unusual because it is the only venomous lizard in North America, and most people never get to see one. Now, there is a very good reason for that, is that this lizard spends most of its life underground because it doesn't have to eat very often. This animal has a digestive system that is so good, so efficient, that it allows itself to survive for up to a year on 3 or 4 good meals. So as a result, it just can stay underground most of the time. In fact, the only times we see these out is when they're actively looking for something to eat, or it's during the mating season. Now, if you notice, big head on this guy, but if I'm going to turn him over here. Now, please don't put your hand in front of his mouth because it has a bite that can be quite painful and it is venomous. But if you see these bumps or these bulges along the lower jaws, those are the venom glands. And so when this animal bites, the venom works into the bite like the saliva in your mouth, and it causes intense pain, and hopefully it leaves a very unpleasant memory in whatever it was this lizard bit, so that the next time that it comes across one, it simply leaves the Gila monster alone. These are called the beaded lizards, and as all of you have touched them, you can feel that sort of beaded texture on the skin. They're little sort of bony projections in the skin, something we call osteoderms, that give it that beaded look and feel.
How can it survive on 3 to 4 meals a year?
Excellent question. The reason that you have to eat so often is because you need to maintain a constant body temperature. That 98.6 keeps you warm. Most of the food you eat gets burned up just generating that heat. Reptiles are cold-blooded, which means that their temperature is going to be the temperature of their surroundings. So on this table, if it's 75 degrees, and the lizard stays here, he will be 75 degrees. Most of his food goes into repairing tissues and allowing him to grow and whatnot, and as a result, he doesn't need to eat anywhere near as often as you. Now, most of these lizards will eat more than 3 or 4 times a year, but if they're forced to, or if they get a really big meal, it may be several weeks or even months until they're hungry again. So it's just one of those attributes that makes it kind of easy for this fellow to live in the desert where he does. He can dig burrows if he has to produce a shelter of his own, or he'll get down in like a desert tortoise burrow or some other hole that's big enough for him, and he'll just sleep. A lot of people think these only come out at night. No, mostly they're active during the daytime, but because they're underground so much of the time, we don't get to see them, and people think, well, they must only be active at night, but that's not true.
What do they eat?
This is an animal that mostly eats small rodents. He'll get down into like a pack rat nest, and he'll find the young pack rats, and he'll eat those. But he also has a very good sense of smell, and as he's walking across the desert, if he's hungry, he will very often smell the eggs that have been laid by other lizards or snakes and that have been buried, and he'll dig them up and he'll eat them. Now, again, these claws, he's a very good climber. This fellow can climb up into low bushes or even trees and get after birds' eggs and the young birds in the nest. So he's going to be eating things like small rodents, small birds, eggs, and he does quite well with that.
How did he get his name?
He got his name probably because the early sightings of these, when they were first found, was down around the Gila River, which runs from New Mexico through Arizona and empties into the Colorado. And because he was big, and people thought he was venomous long before they knew about him, they called him a monster. So he became the Gila monster. It's a real interesting lizard. It's our only one that's venomous, and is also Nevada's largest lizard. Well, that we've looked at a Gila monster, I want to introduce you to a lizard that is very often confused with a Gila monster, but couldn't be more different. And that's this fellow right here, the chuckwalla. This is one of the most common lizards in the desert around Las Vegas. Where you're going to find this one is up in the rocky areas. They're very, very often seen sitting up on top of the rocks. You can get a good look at that, John. And people confuse these with Gila monsters because maybe the only thing they know about a Gila monster is it's a big orange and black lizard, and they see this chuck, well, there's black, there's orange on it, and it's fairly good size, so they think, oh my goodness, it's a Gila monster. And then they think it's venomous, and then maybe they try to hurt it, or they do silly things trying to get away from it quickly. But this one is totally harmless. In fact, this guy's even a vegetarian, whereas the Gila monster eats other animals. This is a plant eater. If you notice the sort of loose, rough skin, it kind of feels like sandpaper. When this guy is trying to hide from a potential threat, he will climb down into a crack in the rock and he will puff himself up. And once he's kind of puffed himself up, it's like a balloon wedged into a crack in the rock, and it makes it very, very difficult to pull him out. So because he doesn't have a venomous bite, he's got to rely on some other means to protect himself. Now, he's a much faster lizard than the Gila monster, but he's still not what you would really call fast, like some of our lizards are. So his primary defense is to get down into a crack in the rock and hide, and hopefully you walk right by him. Now this is a male, this is the boy chuckwalla. And here, in fact, Dalton, you want to just take him and just let him sit gently in your hand, okay? And then keep him over here where we can kind of compare. If you notice, the female is a bit smaller and is much less colorful. And if you notice on the female's tail, it's got the dark bands and light band, dark band, whereas the male tail is pretty much all one color. It's kind of a light color. Well, let me ask you guys a question. You ever catch a lizard?
I caught one once.
Okay. Have you ever had one where the tail broke?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question, John, is did you break the tail or did the lizard break the tail?
The lizard broke the tail.
Good answer. It's a defense mechanism that they have. It's one of the ways they protect themselves. If they're being chased or grabbed, they can break their tail themselves. And what happened? What was the tail doing when it broke?
It was like wiggling around.
It was wiggling around. So if you're the predator and you're coming after this lizard and the tail breaks off and the tail's kind of wiggling around, maybe just for a split second you get distracted and you're looking at the tail and the lizard gets away. Now you remember I said this is a plant eater. So its primary foods are the leaves and flowers of the desert plants. So there's even a plant here in the Mojave Desert called Chuckwalla's Delight that has these little flowers, and the chucks really seem to like it. It apparently has kind of a sweet flavor because the other name for Chuckwalla's Delight is sweetbush. So when he's eating those plants, he's also getting most of the water